Pro et Contra.
Hello and welcome back to another update. It is your host Weeb Union, and in this one we'll be covering the new Russian advances in the direction of the Donetsk region. First off, we have reports of the Russians entering the village of Terny here to the west of Kreminna, and with this it could be a significant development in favor of the Russians here next to the Serbets river line going through the eastern parts of the Luman-Kreminna direction. With this, we see that the Russians have started offensive operations after a failure of an armored offensive a couple of weeks ago. And with this, we see that the Russians are now restarting the offensive operations towards Terny after heavy bombardments on Ukrainian positions identified in the former assault, which cost the Russians a few armored vehicles. This village is now under attack by the Russians, and with this, there could be an indication that the Russians have gained a big enough advantage to gain a foothold. If the Russians gain a foothold within the village of Terny, it will be only a matter of time before the Russians capture it, which would allow them to start pushing towards Yampolivka into the south and Novosadove to the north. So this could be a very significant development in this section of the front line and the start of the Russians' operation to gain control over the eastern bank of the Serbets River, which would subsequently allow the Russians to start pushing towards Liman and developing an offensive operation in that direction. As the situation develops here to the west of Kreminna, there's also this advancement by the Russians to the north of Vesele. The Ukrainians have a series of fortifications to the south of Siversk, and the first line of defense is by Rostolivka, north of Vesele, the second line to the north of Rostolivka. The Russians are pushing straight through to the second line of defense and are likely going to push further westwards to flank the Ukrainian positions by Rostolivka and attacking it from two directions in a pincer maneuver. At the same time, we see from this video here that the Russians launched this offensive operation by launching a few armored assaults with some infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers. These vehicles drive up close to the trenches where they start heavily bombarding it with artillery, FPV drones, and airstrikes, after which their armored vehicles drive up to the trenches and provide cover fire for the Russian infantry gaining a foothold within these trenches and fighting through it. So there's cover fire from the infantry fighting vehicles driving around in circles to avoid Ukrainian artillery fire and FPV drones, while the infantry move up to the trenches to gain control of it and capture it. With these developments, we see that throughout the month of April so far and the first few days of it, the Russians have launched offensive operations in between the west of Donetsk and all the way north to Kreminna. This is the main section of the front line so far. There's also going to be fighting in Novomikhailivka, as the Russians capturing the heights there are allowing them to then start pushing within the town itself. So with this, we see that the Donetsk region itself is where the majority of the fighting is taking place. The front line is also active by Robotyne and in the north by Kupiansk. However, there's no significant offensive operations there so far. We will, however, see an increase in operations everywhere across the front line through this month. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon for additional content.